The big guns under their camouflage netting open up. Veil of secrecy hangs over the truce tents at Panmunjom, not far distant. But here, a veil of fire accents our determination to prosecute a war until a truce is at last won. The commies find it hard to double-talk a flamethrower.
But the communists had found a defense. As in the cities, they dug tunnels, 1,000 kilometers to form an underground Great Wall right across the front.
At first, the tunnels were a straight-through corridor type, which was uncomfortable to live in. We then started to build various living facilities, a canteen, a blacksmith shop, bedrooms, and a bathroom using the natural water dripping down the tunnel. We also built the facilities for battles, as you can see here. Guns were installed in the tunnels, and there were ammunition stores, a lookout post, and firing positions.
North Korea and China had never fought an entrenched war like this, but the West had. The ground fighting at this stage was reminiscent of the First World War, as one member of the 1,000-strong French volunteer battalion recalls.
Pour le définir, c'est Verdun.
Heartbreak Ridge was exactly like Verdun. Look at the photographs taken there, and you will see what it must have been like at Verdun. And the logic of the fighting was also the same, to improve our frontline position, because the politicians were already talking at Panmunjom, or frankly exchanging views, as we say these days.
Ou se concerte, comme on dit maintenant.
Bombs were one frank way to exchange views. In a highly secret operation codenamed Hudson Harbor, the US dropped the ultimate hint.
Operation Hudson Harbor occurred during the Truman administration in the fall of 1951, and there's still as much to be learned about it. Essentially, it consisted of dropping dummy atomic bombs on North Korean positions to try to establish the capability for using the atomic bomb in tactical battlefield situations. In the implementation of this policy, lone B-29s were lifted off of Guam or Okinawa, sent over Korea, and a very large conventional bomb was dropped in the pattern that one would drop an atomic bomb. One needed to know the wind currents. Of course, one also wanted to intimidate the enemy. And you can imagine Kim Il-sung in his bunker requiring nerves of steel to see these lone B-29s coming in on the radar and then a big conventional bomb thudding down.
As the second winter of the war set in, the peace talks began to make some headway. Following agreement on the demarcation line, discussions moved on to the question of prisoners of war. Lists were exchanged. Each side thought the others contained far too few names. Details were telegraphed home. For 3,200 American families, including that of the highest-ranking prisoner, General Dean, there were good tidings at Christmas. But the names of 8,000 other missing soldiers were absent. The ordeal of the UN prisoners in communist hands was far from over. The POWs on both sides were about to become the focus of the conflict and the key to peace. The story of POWs held on both sides is one of the strangest tales in the whole Korean War. Communist propaganda film paints a rosy picture of life in northern holiday camps, but the reality was different. In the early stages of the war, some prisoners, including Western civilians, were force-marched north under a notorious Korean officer known as the Tiger.
The Tiger had dropped to the back of the march at this time, And he came striding along by the march and found these men lying by the roadside. And in a great rage, he stopped the march and said, I gave orders that no one was to be allowed to fall out. Who allowed these men to fall out? And they discovered that men had fallen out from 5 sections. He said, I'm going to shoot the leaders of these sections. So Commissioner Lloyd intervened, and finally the Tiger said, well, I'll shoot the leader of the section from which most men fell out. Which leader is that? And Lieutenant Thornton from Texas stepped forward.
Have you any reason why I shouldn't shoot you, said the Tiger to the lieutenant. The lieutenant said, this, in our country, it would be unacceptable. I would be given a trial. So the Tiger turned to the assembled Koreans and asked whether they thought the lieutenant was guilty or not. And they all shouted that yes, he was guilty. The Tiger said to Lieutenant Thornton, you've had your trial. In our country, sir, he said, we call that lynching. And he was shot in the head and thrown in a ditch, the People's Hospital.
Conditions during the first year under the care of the North Koreans were terrible. Food, medicine, shelter, everything was lacking.
The camp itself was in a disgusting state already. People were suffering with dysentery and things like that. And people were dying right, left and centre, mostly from malnutrition. As we arrived at Pyeongtaung, one of our friends had already gone ahead on an ox cart, Eddie Kurd, and he said, you haven't seen anything yet. He said, do you wait till tonight, so when they carry them out? And we sort of thought, you know, and there, in the evening time they took about 30 or 40 people out, dead Americans, mostly.
1/3 of all American prisoners perished. Starved, frozen and demoralized, they fell victim to disease. Facilities for treating the sick and wounded were primitive.
I would, for instance, see a man who would have an elbow with a deep wound into the bone, and it looked like he was going to lose his arm. I would tell him that, look, I have a little diarrhea. Why don't you meet me down by the latrine, the slit trenches? And it was infested with flies. And we'd take him down there and sit on the fence near there. I'd unwrap his wound and look at it and let a few flies walk over it. And I didn't want to tell him what I was going to do. I don't know if they'd let me do it. Then wrap him back up and say, let's see you in a week. And they would come back in a week and complain about itching intensely. And we'd take it off, and of course it was loaded with maggots. The thing that one must understand, that maggots is a marvelous way to treat a wound. A maggot will only eat dead tissue. And when the dead tissue's gone, they drop off and leave. And so they will totally clean out every recess of a wound that nothing else will work on.
By the beginning of 1952, most UN prisoners were resettled in camps near the Yalu River. Concerned by the high death rate under the North Koreans, the Chinese had taken charge of the Western POWs. Successful escape was impossible, but at least in these new camps, conditions improved.
My work in the army concerned enemy prisoners of war. Our policy towards the prisoners was to treat them well and to protect their lives and property.
The Chinese treated prisoners of war very well indeed, in my opinion. I might be a little biased because I served in Hong Kong before and I like Chinese people. I've always got on well with them. But I found that they were very fair people in the camp.
There was no great physical brutality inside the camps by the Chinese as there was by the North Koreans, who would beat people up at the drop of a hat and on occasions kill them. Quite the contrary, the Chinese had a disciplined atmosphere. Even so, it was not a pleasant atmosphere. It was one full of duplicity. The whole character of the camp was that we were a lot of bad hats who'd got to be reformed. At times it took the form that we were naughty children and that Nanny was going to punish us until we fell into line and admitted our mistakes.
The Chinese had no doubt